Hey guys, this is Luke, also known as Retro Tech Rewind for Central Pennsylvania Reviews. Today we're going to be making an interesting, I guess, repro cart, you could call it. You might be wondering why I have two carts here. So this is my original StarFox 2 repro that I had made. I had made it, oh geez, I couldn't tell you how long ago it was that I made it, but this is my first one, and the ROM on this particular cart is the previously released incomplete beta ROM, I guess you could call it. And those of you who aren't living under a rock will know that the Super Nintendo Mini, or Classic Mini, whatever it is, was just recently released, and it had what Nintendo is telling us is the complete ROM. So what I'm going to be doing is actually, because there are some differences, some not huge, but you know, minor enough that it keeps me interested anyway. Differences between this earlier version and what will be the final version here. I'm actually going to make another cart. So I have this extra Stunt Race FX board, the entire cart really, but what we're going to do is I'm going to quickly go over how it is that you will be able to make your own Super FX related ROM repros, I guess you could say. If there is another way or another kind of donor board where you don't need to sacrifice a Super FX game, I am not aware of it. So, that being said, we'll jump in here. I'd like to get a new label for this. The one I will be using, where did I put that guy? This is the one I will be using from a website called Retro Game Cases. They're pretty good people. I've never had any issues with them. So anyway, you can see that the label is actually different than the one I have on here right now. So I guess that'll be the way for me to be able to differentiate between the two. Maybe I'll put like a little tiny removable label on one of these saying which one's the beta and which one is the final version. But for now, the first thing we're going to have to do is obviously open up this cart here. So, just get your game bit, take these screws out. Let's see. And we'll set those aside so they don't inevitably get lost. And one thing I will actually do real quick is show you how I go about removing labels on carts that I'm making repros of. So, I just use a pretty simple heat gun. You can hear it here. You don't want to get it too hot. You want to set it to a nice warm temperature, but just kind of glide over the label. You don't want to stay in one spot too long, or else you'll end up warping or melting the plastic. So just kind of get the whole thing warmed up. Doesn't have to be anything too crazy. Let's do that. Alright, that should be good. Now, I'm going to take this razor blade and very carefully just kind of gently peel up one of the edges. And we'll see if we can't get this off in almost one piece, or as close to one piece as possible. So it's very imperative to get the glue warmed up, or else this thing is just going to be a nightmare to take off. Alright, so we got a little bit of residue left over, but that's not going to be a problem, because all I'm going to need is a little piece of paper towel. Goo Gone works the best, however, I have found that leaves like a weird kind of oily residue. So if you got some pretty easy stuff to get off, you can see the grime on here is not too bad. It's just a little bit of the adhesive from the label. So I like to use just rubbing alcohol and spill it all over my desk, as you can see here. Just go ahead and just clean that stuff off. Pretty simple. Okay. Get this last little bit off right here. I have seen some people use those Mr. Clean Magic Erasers. Those are good for cleaning up like scuff marks and stuff like that on plastic. However, you do have to be aware that you're actually taking away a thin layer of plastic. So never use that on any kind of plastic where it has like tamper-graphed like paint or any kind of, otherwise text or writing on it, or even textured plastic too, because it will kind of smooth out the texture, and it's definitely noticeable. So anyway, we got the label all cleaned up here. Get some of this rubbing alcohol out of here. Alright, so the next thing we're going to want to do is, well, this is the board itself, as you can see. You got your RAM up here. I'm assuming this is the CIC chip. You got your save battery, the actual ROM itself. Oh, I'm sorry, the CIC is down here. What is this? It's just an, okay, that's just a CMOS logic. Here's your actual crystal, which this is the oscillator that you would replace or otherwise remove or modify if you wanted to overclock the game. I'm not going to be overclocking this particular cart. My StarFox 2 beta repro is actually overclocked, albeit very, very slightly, just enough to make everything run a little bit more smoothly. You can see this particular board has the GSU-1 FX chip. I do believe, obviously, that it is possible to use the GSU-2 chips. As far as I know, the only one I know offhand is Yoshi's Island that has that. I'm not sure if it would make a huge difference or not as far as performance-wise for this repro, but don't quote me on that. So if you guys know, you're more than welcome to leave a comment and let me know. But first thing we're going to do here is take off this battery. So it's just a little bit of solder on either side, so I'm just going to heat it up and pull it out here very gently. And you'll notice you'll probably notice I'm using a very strange soldering iron tip. This is for removing the ROM, as I'll do here in a moment. So get that guy out of there. And I'll set the battery aside for now. And so what I like to do with these, you can use a razor blade to cut the legs. You can snip them with small tin snips, whatever you're comfortable with. Just be wary that these traces under here are pretty small and delicate, so you obviously don't want to go and just kind of tear it off or anything, or else you might, well, you will damage the traces. So what I like to do is this kind of flat soldering iron tip here that I use for removing certain kind of surface mount chips here. So all we're going to do, let's see if I can't zoom in a little bit for you. All I'm going to do here, sorry, I know that light is very bright. I'm going to get some tweezers. I'm going to grab one side of the chip, grab the other side, and what we're going to do is we're going to heat up both sides of this chip one at a time and just gently lift up with the tweezers. So you can see that lifts up, that heats up all the solder pads there. On this side, I don't think I'll even need the tweezers, so just kind of gently, there you go. Very simple. No broken legs, so if I ever, I mean, I got another copy of Stunt Race FX, but if I ever wanted to, I could put this chip back on in theory. So I'm going to smooth out the solder points here a little bit on either side. And you can see, looking pretty good. So next thing, next thing you're going to need is a ROM. So if you know anything about making Super Nintendo repros or Super Famicom repros, whichever one you're into, the EEPROM that most people use is a 1 megabit EEPROM. It is a M27C801. I'll write all this down in the description in case you need to copy paste it to find your own, but there are a number of flash chips available, and there's also a number of flash chip adapter boards available. This particular board here is an exception because it uses this surface mount ROM that isn't typically found on a lot of other Super Nintendo games. Well, a majority of them. Most of them just use a standard dip through hole chip, kind of like this. So I do believe, I'll put the link in the description, I forget the name of the website, but there is one company that makes an adapter board that lets you use a 2.9 something flash chip instead of one of these EEPROMs. But for all intents and purposes right now, I'm just going to be using the EEPROM. This particular EEPROM is already burnt with the ROM that in question. I use a, where is it? Here we go. I use this guy. It's a GQ4X. It's a very reliable programmer. You'll see I actually replaced my ZIF socket with a more robust one because I very rarely ever use it for the smaller outline chips. So that's why this larger footprint one is better. I have this little piece of tape here just in case so that screw doesn't hit anything on the adapter board and short anything out. And then this little guy right here, this is just a switch that I actually added myself that swaps, pin 2 on the ZIF connector and pin 24 on the ZIF connector for certain types of chips that you would otherwise need to put a physical manual wire jumper in. So it's for like repairing Neo Geo games like the M1 ROM, or even some NES repros, or even some Super Nintendo repros, I guess, if you use the right kind of chip. But that being said, can't recommend the GQ4X highly enough. It is very easy to use. It's powered through USB. You can put an external power supply on here for older chips that require a higher voltage for your programming. But either way, maybe in another video I'll demonstrate on how to properly burn ROMs and use things like that of that nature. But for right now, we got this ROM. Everything's burnt on here already. So now that we have our board naked, I'm going to go ahead and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend up all of the legs on this EEPROM so they lay flat. And just do it carefully because you don't want to break any off. So we're going to bend up all the legs because otherwise this will not fit inside the cart shell. So what I like to do is just bend them all up like this. And I'm actually going to snip off these little ends of the legs here. So first of all, get all these guys flipped up again. And again, you want to be gentle because you don't want to go snapping pins off, because then that's just more of a headache, honestly. All right, so now that we have that done, you might be wondering why pins 24 and 31 here look a little strange. I actually had previously programmed this for another repro, like an English patched repro that I had made, but ended up not actually ever using it. So I'm actually going to go ahead and just get these two little pins off here, because they require you to, if you use a certain swap bin ROM application, it lets you pretty much swap some of the address points on the physical ROM image itself to be able to use an M27C 801 chip more easily. Otherwise, you would have to swap quite a number of pins. With the swap bin trick, as they call it, the only two pins that you need to physically swap are these two here, only because I believe one is the chip enable pin, or on the Super Nintendo PCB, I guess you could call it, one of the I think it's address 18 and chip enable. I could be wrong, don't quote me on that, but they're physically swapped, so there's no way you can change that with hardware. So as you can see, the pins are flattened out, and I'm actually going to go ahead and snip all the legs down just a tad. Again, you really want to make sure that your ROM is correctly burnt, I should add, because if not, it is going to be, I wouldn't call this a point of no return, but it certainly is going to be a lot more of a pain in the ass to try and reburn this chip, because you'll have to solder back on manual pins. I actually keep, one little bit of advice for you guys, I actually keep old IC chips. This is from a Super Nintendo repro that I had made, but I keep the old IC chips and just for pulling the legs off in case I need one to replace or repair another chip. I'll just grab it with the pliers, kind of bend it, and then you'll end up with a nice chip leg. And depending on how the chip leg is damaged on your original chip, I guess you could call it, you can go ahead and just solder a new one on there. Makes it pretty easy, pretty simple. So I would highly recommend doing that. Alright, so the next thing we're going to do is, I'm going to zoom in a little bit here, and I'm going to add solder to each one of these legs. However, I am going to flip it around because the way it's going to be sitting on the board, it's going to be upside down like this. So, we're just going to add a little bit of solder to every single one of the legs here. Alright, so got all the legs soldered up here, as you can tell. Now, for those of you who are not aware, on IC chips like this, usually there's a little divot, as you can see right here, or some that don't have a divot might have a little spot or a dot or some kind of mark down in one of the corners, and that designates where pin 1 is located on the chip. So on this particular chip, this is pin 1, and the way that ICs work in this type of dip package, it goes 1 through 16. I think there's a 32 pin, so pin 1, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then instead of starting up left to right, it actually goes around in a loop. So pin 1, pin 16, pin 17, pin 32 up at the top corner here. So just when you put this on your board, as I'm about to show you, just make note of where the pins are actually located. So what I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to have to wire individually small little 30 gauge wires up to the actual EEPROM. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take the EEPROM and I'm going to just kind of carefully hot glue it actually to the board here. And that way I will just be able to route my wires around fairly simply, and it will still fit in the cartridge shell case. You can see there's plenty of negative space up here for us to fit that chip in there. So I'll zoom out a little bit here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and just kind of carefully use a little bit of hot glue to secure this chip onto the actual board itself. Alright guys, so we're back, and as you can see, I have the ROM chip all wired up to this Super Nintendo PCB board here. I went ahead and just skipped the whole process of me cutting up all the wires and soldering them on because it's pretty self-explanatory. As you can see here, I got a little bit of hot glue that I used just to hold the wires down, so that way it made it easier for me to wire them up to the back side of the chip here. So what I did was just cut individual pieces of wire, 16 wires for each side. It's a little tedious, it's a little monotonous, but it gets the job done. So what I did was, hold on, let me see if I can get this better lighting here. What I did was I went ahead and just soldered each individual wire there and ran it along here to the back to each individual pin of the chip. And the same with the top. However, the wires got a little bit more interesting up this way. I just put some of them tucked under where the battery was soldered back into place here, and you can see that they're just all individually soldered there as well. So, alright, with that being said, I went ahead and tested all the various connections with my multimeter and made sure that I didn't have any shorts. So the moment of truth now is to plug this into the Super Nintendo and see if it works. Alright, so I got my PCB in the, well, this is a Super Famicom right now. I just happen to have this out because I was testing it, because it's listed on eBay currently. But either way, I happen to have a Super Famicom out right here, so I have to just put just the bare PCB in right now because obviously Super Nintendo games will not fit in a Super Famicom. So, Moment of truth here. We're going to turn this bad boy on and see what happens. All right. Looks and sounds good so far. Again, this is actually through a component connection. Turn this light off up here and look better. And it's kind of hard to film a CRT TV because you can never get a good picture quality. Or at least the camera doesn't record in a good enough quality. And as you can tell, the title screen is actually different on this version. So, that's an interesting, what is that? Oh, okay, that's just the audio. This is the first time I've ever actually played the complete, well, I guess you could call it the SNES Mini version. So, this PCB does have a battery in it, so I will be able to save my various high scores and whatnot. So, let's see, normal, hard. Let's just try normal for now. I also noticed that the opening text here is a little bit different than the official version, well, than the previously leaked beta version. So keep an eye on our channel. I might actually have a comparison video up for you guys. If you watched our old videos, you'll know that we did a series on the various StarFox games for the Super Nintendo. We did have a competition as well with the competition cart, and we did review StarFox 1, the beta StarFox 2, and I'm sure we will have a review of the official StarFox 2 cartridge here pretty soon. So, alright. So I got the cart put back together here. I put my nice new label on here, as you can tell. Looks very good. Again, if you're interested in getting any good labels for your Repro cartridges, please check out the link below, retrogamecases.com. I've only ever purchased labels from them for a couple of the Repros that I've done, and the ones that I have got have all been absolutely fantastic. They're, I think it's like a vinyl, and it's not like those cardboard ones that you see a lot where this top part starts peeling up and sticking straight up. I've been to plenty of conventions where people will sell Super Nintendo Repros with those on it, and they're like sticking up straight up, and it looks just, I'm not gonna lie, it looks awful. So that being said, please check them out. I'm not sponsored by them, obviously. I just think they have a good product. But I do like how that there's you know, two different labels here. I can easily tell them apart, and I went ahead and put a little sticker that just says beta on the back of this one, and then this is the final version, as you can tell. So again, please keep an eye out on the channel. We will post, I'm sure, a video review and comparison video between the two versions of StarFox 2. Definitely something that I'm looking forward to making, and I'm sure Chris and Alex and Chuck and everybody else in the PA holes are going to be looking forward to making as well. So, again, I am Luke, also known as Retro Tech Rewind for Central Pennsylvania Reviews. If you like this video, or you want to see some other videos similar to this on how to make repros or how to program EEPROMs or anything like that, drop a comment below and make a request. We'll be happy to do it. So, thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. And until next time, we'll see you later. Alright, so with that being said... God damn it.